All right, good afternoon. The Secretary General will leave for Rome tomorrow, where he will attend a conference in support of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, otherwise known as UNRWA. The conference is intended to support a collective response to from the international community to protect the rights and dignity of some 5.3 Palestine refugees registered with UNRWA and ensure that the agency's funding deficit of $446 million is urgently resolved. While in Rome, the Secretary General will also co-chair a ministerial meeting of the International Support Group for Lebanon. He will emphasize the importance of supporting the people and state institutions of Lebanon. The Secretary General will then travel on to Lisbon, where he will speak at the Islamic Community of Lisbon as it marks its 50th anniversary as an organization. The Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mark Lowcock, is releasing $30 million today from the Central Emergency Response Fund to urgently support Palestine refugees through UNRWA. An exceptional grant of $15 million will enable UNRWA to avoid a disruption of life-saving food assistance for vulnerable refugees in the occupied Palestinian territory, where over 2.5 million people are currently in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Donors are encouraged to step up urgently and increase their support for the humanitarian action in the occupied Palestinian territory and in the region, and for UNRWA as a major humanitarian aid provider. Press release will be issued shortly. Also staying on in the region, Nikolai Mladenov, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, condemned the attack on the convoy of Palestinian Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah in Gaza earlier today and wished those injured a speedy recovery. This grave incident must be promptly investigated and the perpetrators brought to justice. He said that until the legitimate Palestinian Authority is fully empowered in Gaza, Hamas has the responsibility to ensure that the government is able to carry out its work in the Strip without fear of intimidation, harassment, or violence. He commended the Prime Minister's leadership in continuing efforts to address the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza and achieve reconciliation. Mr. Mladenov said that those who inspired and perpetrated today's attack seek to undermine these efforts and destroy the chances for peace. They must not be allowed to succeed, he said. Turning to Syria, the United Nations is following developments in AFRIN closely. However, details continue to be difficult to verify as we have no presence in the district. Tens of thousands of people are believed to be displaced within AFRIN. Between the 20th of January and the 12th of March, nearly 10,000 people were reportedly displaced to Tal Rifat and surrounding villages, 7,000 of whom are sheltered in schools and unfinished buildings. An additional 7,200 people were reportedly displaced to other areas of Aleppo Governorate. The UN also has received reports of civilian casualties and restrictions on movements for many civilians. There are reports that some are trying to leave Afrin have been prevented from doing so by the authorities there. Since March 6, people in Afrin city have also reportedly suffered from severe water shortages, and the source of water into the city has reportedly been damaged by fighting. The UN reminds all parties to take the necessary measures to safeguard civilian lives, allow for freedom of movement, and protect civilian infrastructure as required by international humanitarian and human rights law. And I have a senior personnel appointment to announce. The Secretary General is appointing Mr. ELLIOTT Harris of Trinidad and Tobago as Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development and Chief Economist in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. He succeeds Lenny Montiel of Venezuela, to whom the Secretary General and the Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs are grateful for his commitment and dedicated service to the United Nations. Mr. Harris brings over 25 years of international experience in the field of international economics and development policy analysis, coupled with knowledge of the UN system, multilateral and interagency coordination process. Since 2015, he has served as the Assistant Secretary General and head of UNEP's, the UN Environmental Programs Office in New York. More information in my office. Today at 1:30 p.m. in the ECOSOC chamber, the Secretary General will hold a town hall meeting with members of civil society on the margins of the Commission of the Status of Women. Also on the CSW, yesterday afternoon, the Deputy Secretary General, Mina Mohammed, spoke at the Spotlight Initiative event to eliminate violence against women and girls. She said since the initiative launched last September, the UN and the European Union carried out a global consultation process to listen to the experiences of women's movement and civil society, and based on these, the initiative has developed programs that will be implemented over the next few months in various countries. The programs are designed to strengthen the protection of women and girls, promote access to justice, and improve policy and legal frameworks. Violence against women and girls has nowhere to hide, she said. We are coming for it in all its forms and manifestations around the world. And I also want to flag that the 2017 report of the Secretary General on special measures for protection from sexual exploitation and sexual abuse has now been issued. It's available online on our dedicated website on preventing sexual exploitation and abuse. And at 2 p.m. in this very room, Jane Hall-Lute, the Special Coordinator on improving the UN's response to sexual exploitation and abuse, will be here to brief you in this very room. Going back to the field, the Secretary General Special Representative for Iraq, Jan Kubish, welcomed today the announcement of Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi to reopen the international airports in the Kurdistan region to international flights. Mr. Kubish said this is a significant positive step that is certain to boost the atmosphere of partnership between the federal government and the Kurdistan regional government. He called for the speedy implementation of the decision and continued dialogue to resolve all other outstanding issues. And Lise Grande, the new resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator for Yemen, arrived in Sana'a yesterday to start her duties. Ms. Grande has served in some of the UN's largest humanitarian operations and peacekeeping missions, including, as you know, in Iraq most recently, but also South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. She's also led UN country teams in India, Armenia, Angola, and served also in Tajikistan and Sudan. And from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mark Lowcock, arrived today in Kalimi in the southeastern province of Tanganyika, where 700,000 people are internally displaced. Mr. Lowcock visited the Katanyika internally displaced site, which is home to some 10,000 people who have fled violence. Women and children make up most of the displaced population. During the visit, Mr. Lowcock met with a group of women who shared their experiences on the violence and the difficult living conditions. Speaking to Mr. Lowcock, who is accompanied by the Netherlands Minister of Foreign Trade and Development, our former colleague, Sigrid Kaag, the women requested more humanitarian assistance. They said they needed education and health for their children and income-generating activities such as farming and fishing. Mr. Lowcock also met with some young boys and girls who have left school due to violence. The delegation also visited Kalumga site, home to 3,500 people who have been displaced since 2016. During the visit, the humanitarian coordinator in the DRC, Kim Bulduk, also signed an agreement with the Tanganyika governor to provide a more enabling environment for humanitarian sites in the province. And in Ethiopia, our UN's humanitarian partners and the government today launched the country's humanitarian disaster resilience plan for 2018. The plan seeks $1.66 billion to reach around 7.9 million people in need of assistance following recent successive failed or underperforming rains, mainly in the southern and eastern part of the country, as well as an increase in conflict-related displacement in the border areas of Oromia and Somali regions, and a lack of recovery activities. And the Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide, Adama Dieng, today concluded a visit to Bangladesh to assess the situation of the Rohingya refugee population. During the visit, he met with Bangladeshi authorities and civil society representatives and visited refugee camps in Cox's Bazar. Mr. Dieng said that the international crime of murder, torture, and rape were committed in Myanmar. The information received by the Special Advisor indicates the intention of the perpetrators to cleanse northern Rakhine state of Rohingya existence, which, if proven, would constitute genocide. He said if the Rohingyas must receive protection and support as refugees in Bangladesh, and the international community must do more to assist Bangladesh in support to the refugees. Mr. Dieng added that the solution to this problem lies with the Myanmar authorities by creating the conditions for Rohingya population to return home in safety. We have a note with more details. And almost lastly, UNHCR today issued a new protection guidance encouraging states to ensure Venezuelans who are seeking asylum have access to territory and refugee procedures. UNHCR said that in view of the situation in Venezuela, it's crucial that people are not deported or forcibly returned. According to the UNHCR, since 2014, there's been a 2,000% increase in the number of people fleeing Venezuela. While 94,000 Venezuelans were able to access refugee procedures last year, hundreds of thousands of them remain without any documentation or permission to stay legally in asylum countries, making them especially vulnerable. And you saw that yesterday afternoon we issued a statement in which the Secretary General welcomed the joint statement issued by President Uhuru Kenyatta and Mr. Raila Odinga on March 9th, declaring their commitment to work together to strengthen the unity of country for all Kenyans. Tomorrow at 11:30 a.m., there will be a press briefing here by the International Interparliamentary Union on the newly released IPU report on Women in Parliament 2017. A big halas. I've used enough words. Ms. Lederer.
Thank you, Stéphane. Two questions. First, I believe that the Secretary General met outgoing Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and I wonder if he has any comment on the President's decision to change the Secretary of State. And secondly, on Venezuela, has the UN received any request for electoral assistance?
Okay, a couple of things. Well, you know, the decision as announced by President Trump is a decision taken by the U.S. government. We have no comment on that. On a personal note, the Secretary General has spoken by phone and met with Secretary of State Tillerson a number of times. I think he's always appreciated the relationship he has built with Mr. Tillerson during the time in office, and they've had. I think they had a very good positive relationship, and the Secretary General wishes Mr. Tillerson well, and of course looks forward to a positive relationship with the successor to Mr. Tillerson. On Venezuela, I'm not aware that we have received it's on the issue of electoral assistance. The answer remains the same, which is that we would need a mandate would have to be given to the Secretariat by either the General Assembly or the Security Council to observe the elections in Venezuela. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. On the conference in Rome, do you have more details who will be participating in this meeting and who will chair it beside the Secretary General?
Which one?
I mean the UNRWA meeting,
yeah,
for fundraising for UNRWA in Rome, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have any details on that, please.
Sure. The meeting is in fact called for and co-chaired by Egypt and Sweden and a third country, and Jordan, excuse me. Thank you very much. No disrespect to our Jordanian friends, but I'm getting old. You know, for the Secretary General, I think it's a very important meeting to try to rally the international community to ensure that the critical, life-saving, and stabilizing work that UNRWA does in the region continues to be funded and is funded in a way that will enable them to serve the millions of Palestinians that are registered under UNRWA, especially on the issues of education and health.
On a related issue, Stéphane, the White House hosted a meeting on Gaza, saying that Gaza it is going through a humanitarian disaster as we speak. Would Gaza issue be also one of the topics to be discussed in the Rome meeting, or is just only for UNRWA?
Well, it's UNRWA funding. So UNRWA, as you know, is present in Gaza, in the occupied West Bank. It's present in Jordan. It's present in Syria. And by the way, I stand corrected. The conference is co-hosted by Egypt, Jordan, and Italy. Okay. Senor.
Thank you, Stéphane. Another follow-up on Venezuela. We understand there is a delegation of the Venezuelan government here in New York City, along with the opposition presidential candidate, Mr. Henry Falcón. And we understand that they're trying to look for a space maybe to meet with Secretary General Guterres. They have said in Venezuela that they are actually having this meeting, which is quite
They are having meetings in New York. They will be meeting with Jeffrey Feltman, the Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, and in the meeting it will be Delcy Rodriguez, the President of the National Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, the Minister of Communication, and Mr. Henry Falcón, who is, as you know, candidate. Yeah.
So Mr. Feldman, no, with Secretary General.
Exactly, it's with Mr. Feldman.
Okay.
Exactly. Matthew Lee.
Sure. I wanted to ask you about the Bishop of Bangassou in CAR has given a lengthy interview in which he said he describes the sexual exploitation of people in the town by blue helmets or peacekeepers as being routine, not an exception, but rather the rule. He's given it to a Spanish newspaper. His name is Juan Aguirre Munoz, and I'm just wondering, it seems contrary to everything that's been said in this room about the steps being taken. What is the response? Is the bishop entirely wrong, or is that... what is the UN's response to this bishop's description of the situation?
Sexual abuse is not routine. Sexual abuse needs to be rooted out. From the Secretary General on down to all his heads of missions are very focused on rooting it out, on investigating each and every case. Our colleagues in the mission in MINUSCA have already issued a press release, I think a few days ago, following the information about sexual abuse committed by its troops as relayed by the Bishop of Bangassou. Reports of possible sexual abuse in Bangassou were brought to the attention of the mission 2 months ago, and a fact-finding mission was conducted, including by the Force Provost Marshal, the head of the UN's mission in Bangassou, and human rights officers. The mission spoke to a number of local sources, including NGOs, providing assistance to displaced people on the site, and the fact-finding mission concluded that the reports could not be substantiated. We, of course, continue to maintain very close contact with local officials in order to see if there's any other information that comes forward. We're able to investigate it, and since then, the mission has also re-upped its and reinforced its training for troops that are stationed in Bangassou in an effort to prevent any cases of sexual abuse.
I guess since this bishop was in charge of a church where some 2,000 people were sheltered, fleeing, and he says that women and even girls were made pregnant by UN soldiers, has the UN sought to speak to the bishop? Has the UN
the bishop is a well-known personality in Bangassou. The Secretary General met with him, and we were in Bangassou. We visited the site, so people know the bishop. The mission knows the bishop. What I'm saying is that the mission investigated human rights officers, Force Provost Marshal, to try to get information, and obviously talking to all the people that need to be spoken to, and they could not substantiate the allegations.
Yeah, I guess I just want to know. It seems like that would be a part of the investigation. If a person goes public with
I have no doubt that the bishop the conversation was had with the bishop. Senor.
Gracias. Just a follow-up on Venezuela. Some opposition groups were asking yesterday to the UN team in the country not to support this electoral observation. I know the UN needs a mandate from the Security Council or the General Assembly, but does the Secretary General support this idea of an electoral observation, or what would his recommendation be?
It's for the Secretary General. He would need to get a mandate. So it's not whether he supports or doesn't support. It's a matter of member states agreeing and voting on a resolution to dispatch UN observers for those elections.
Does he think the conditions in the country are sufficient for a free and fair elections?
This is a decision to be made by member states. Monsieur.
Merci, monsieur. In the note to correspondent Mr. Adama Diangs, he urges the Security Council to consider different accountability options. We've seen that the Security Council has taken a number of meetings on the question of the Rohingya, but the situation on the ground remains the same. Can you elaborate on what options Mr. Diang is referring to?
Short answer is no. I haven't been able to speak to him, so I will try to speak to him, but I don't want to. I don't want to elaborate on without having had a conversation with him. So my bad.
Thanks, Stéphane. Many of those who exited Eastern Ghouta have said that they were used as hostage, as human shields. Civilians are being put in cellars and prevented from going. Some of the civilians have been shot and killed when they attempted to flee or protest. There were protests. Do you have any first-hand information? Are you meeting these people?
What I can tell you is that we did observe today an evacuation of 147 civilians. Among those, there were 10 critical cases, mostly women and children from Duma. As we get more details, we'll share them with you. If any further evacuations of civilians are planned, the UN will be available to observe and provide assistance to them in the shelters where they will be hosted. On the humanitarian front, there are plans to send a humanitarian convoy to Duma in the coming days. The priority for us, for the Secretary General, I think as he so eloquently stated yesterday, is the full implementation of Resolution 2401. If you look at what has been happening all over Syria, if you look at what has been happening especially in Eastern Ghouta, it is clear that civilians are on the front lines of suffering, are taking the brunt of the suffering, that none of the parties seem to have any regard for the suffering of civilians. We want to see a full implementation of the resolution. We want to have full humanitarian access, unfettered, unhampered, to all those people who need to have it.
Is there any progress with regard to evacuation of the civilians on the political side? There were talk about Jaish al-Islam may want to exit from Eastern Ghouta. Is the United Nations playing any mediation role?
What I've just said is that we were able to witness the evacuation of 147 civilians. We have been facilitating meetings and made it clear that we're available to observe any other evacuations. I can only speak to what's actually happened. Yes, sir.
About Idlib, the people, they move him from, like civilian people and the fighter or whatever it is, they move him to Idlib. So in this road, there any protection for these people, or? Because I heard in the news like
the protection that the UN offers is to be there, to be on site. It is not military protection. We are there as civilian humanitarian workers. Sometimes the mere presence of UN officials does provide a layer of protection. It is, again, we have seen all too often civilians being targeted in Syria. Matthew and then Abdelhamid.
Sure. I want to ask you about two meetings of the Secretary General, one today and one yesterday. The one today was with Ecuador's foreign minister. And I guess I wanted to know, as I'm sure you know or know from Brendan, she's a candidate for PGA, and there's a second candidate. He's met with her twice so far this year. Can you give a readout of the meeting, and is there any concern, is there any equal time provisions, or what was there?
Look, I mean, there are 193 votes in the General Assembly. None of those include Antonio Guterres.
Sure.
So it's
was
not.
The race,
it's not an election that he votes in.
Sure.
He has. It's not for him to endorse or to back any particular candidate.
Did the election come up in the meeting?
I don't know. I don't have a readout.
Okay, but yesterday, you may know this. I don't know if you will say it, but in the meeting with H.R. McMaster, did the idea of a UN role, any UN role, even as a venue for the announced Trump Kim Jong-un talks?
No, I'm not aware that came up. They discussed, obviously, they discussed situation in the Korean Peninsula. They discussed Yemen, they discussed Libya, and had a broader discussion on peace missions. Okay.
Can I ask you one other thing?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about Burundi, since there is an envoy. One, 3 human rights activists from the group Parsem have been sentenced to 10 years in jail for reportedly organizing a human rights workshop. So it seemed to many people to be a pretty extreme sentence, and I wonder if there's any comment on that. And 2, the President Pierre Nkurunziza has been reportedly named the eternal supreme guide of the CNDD-FDD party, which people see as sort of a part of a progression. They now say he's just a visionary. But I guess I wanted to know is, does the UN think that what's happening in Burundi, given that you have an envoy, is it leading more toward sort of one-person eternal visionary rule, or are things going in the way in which the envoy was supposed to be trying to work on it?
I would listen. It's not for me to comment on party roles that leaders, titles that leaders may get. I think the Secretary General's position on Burundi and his concerns about Burundi are outlined in his latest report on Burundi, and they stand. On the human rights activists, I will check. Abdelhamid.
Thank you. There are new reports from Yemen saying that more civilians had been killed recently. But my question is about the new envoy to Yemen, Mr. Griffin. Mm-hmm. Is he now in place? Is he in the field?
He's here. He's seeing the Secretary General today.
Yeah, and
so he's taking office, but he is. My understanding is that he's not gone to the region yet.
Okay. On the same subject, how is the flow of aid to Hodeidah and Salif?
I have no update on that. We'll try to get you something for tomorrow. Thank you. And Brendan is up.